The leather of Gregory Blaine's Mercedes was stitched with the kind of precision that screams old money, cool, unforgiving, and indifferent to the man sinking into it. I leaned back, watching the soft golden glow of Maison Ferrell spill out across the driveway like a red carpet meant for someone else. 20 minutes ago, I was walking beside Celia, my wife of 6 years, adjusting the cuff of my blazer with the quiet pride of a man who thought he belonged. I'd even paid for the dress she wore, the midnight blue one that hugged her frame like it was made for her alone. It was her favorite designer, one I learned to pronounce correctly after hearing her gush about a runway debut on YouTube years ago. I'd wanted her to shine tonight. But that didn't stop Gregory, her father, from stopping us mid-step outside the restaurant. He gripped my forearm like I was a child about to embarrass him in public, leaned close, and hissed in a voice that had dismissed interns and bank managers alike. "Wait in the car. We need these investors. Don't ruin this." By ruin, he meant me. The son-in-law who didn't go to Stanford, didn't wear the right shoes to brunch, didn't charm his country club friends with tales of internships at Goldman Sachs or stories about secret ski lodges in Aspen. The man they tolerated. Barely. The one who stood in family photos like a waiter accidentally caught in the frame. So I returned to the car. Obedient. Silent. But not small. I reclined in the back seat, letting the chill of the leather snake through my dress shirt. I watched them walk in, Celia, poised and perfect in her heels, Gregory, towering with artificial warmth, her mother, Margot, floating behind them like a scent of lavender and judgment. Ariel, Celia's sister, tottered forward in a dress too tight and a smirk too loose. Not one of them looked back. Not even Celia. I didn't blame her. She had learned to survive them by blending in, by keeping her head down and her voice pleasant. For years, I thought she was different. I still wanted to believe she was. But belief can be a stubborn, foolish thing. My phone buzzed, lighting up the dark cabin with a cold blue glow. A message from Lauren, my assistant, my right hand, the only person who'd believed in my vision when it was just late-night voice notes and coded spreadsheets. The acquisition is finalized. Ferrell Tech now belongs to us. CEO arriving shortly. I stared at the screen for a long second before the corners of my mouth lifted, slow and quiet. Ferrell Tech, the crown jewel Gregory had been chasing for months. In Maison Ferrell, the venue itself? I owned the parent company. Bought it in cash. No press. No announcements. Because real power doesn't advertise itself. The man they were waiting on tonight, the CEO Gregory was fawning over? He worked for me. I leaned forward and looked out the tinted glass. The valet was juggling keys and guests, ushering Teslas and Bentleys into place like a conductor in a tailored coat. My reflection stared back at me in the window, dark eyes, square jaw, the faintest smirk rising from the truth buried in my silence. This wasn't just another night. This was the unveiling. For years, I'd been the shadow in Celia's life, never failing, never truly seen. I was the plus one, the helper, the kind man with the quiet job who never made waves. But I hadn't been that man for a long time. AM Foundry wasn't a pipe dream anymore. It was a multi-tiered investment machine that had swallowed smaller companies and spit out innovation. While Gregory hosted scotch tastings and bluffed his way through market trends, I'd built something real, something untouchable. And tonight, I wasn't going to hide it. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my jacket and letting the cold night air bite at the back of my neck. No announcement. No flourish. Just steps, measured, quiet, lethal. I didn't go through the main entrance. I walked around to the back, where the real operations happened. The staff knew me not as a customer, but as the man who signed their bonuses. In the kitchen, sous chefs nodded respectfully, servers straightened their backs. One of them, Henry, the maitre d' who'd once worked under my mentorship program, approached with an eager smile. "Mr. Blaine," he said. "The Blaine party is seated near the wine cellar. Private table." I smirked. Blaine. The name still sat on my shoulders like a borrowed coat. "Escort me in 10, I told him. "Wait until they're settled." He nodded and disappeared with the ease of someone used to high stakes. I walked toward the restroom, stood at the sink, and looked at myself in the mirror. The face they ignored. The face they underestimated. Still me. Just older. Wiser. Louder, without ever needing to raise my voice. As I dried my hands, I imagined their faces when it happened. When the mask dropped and the truth slipped out between the cracks they'd never cared to inspect. They had built their entire perception of me on who I wasn't. They never asked who I was. And tonight, they'd learn. Not from me shouting or pleading, but from silence that thundered. From a room that shifted when I entered. from their own reflection staring back at them across the table, questioning everything they thought they knew. I returned to the hallway outside the wine cellar just as Henry signaled me forward. My pulse stayed steady. My spine straightened. No hesitation. Because I wasn't walking into that room to prove anything. I was walking in because I owned it. Because the man Gregory thought wasn't good enough to sit at his table had built the one he was now groveling beneath. The air inside Maison Farrell was warm, filled with the gentle hum of clinking glasses and low conversations. The kind of ambience designed to make everyone feel wealthy, even if only for the night. But I wasn't there for ambience. I was there for revelation. I entered through the back hallway, where white-jacketed servers moved like clock hands, silent, efficient, and precise. They all knew me. Some nodded as I passed. Others stiffened slightly, unsure whether they should address me as Mr. Blaine or simply Sir. I gave them no correction. Let the silence work its own magic. The maitre d' waited by the archway leading to the main dining area, his expression a careful blend of composure and barely restrained curiosity. "Ready, sir?" he asked. I adjusted my sleeves and gave him a single nod. "Walk me in." He stepped forward ahead of me, cutting through the room with the kind of presence only someone trained in this world possessed. Diners glanced up, some politely, others with the subtle nosiness of people who recognized when something important was about to happen. And then I saw them. Gregory, Celia, Ariel, and two men I didn't recognize, probably the investors they were courting. Gregory had leaned into his natural stagecraft, arms gesturing as he spoke, wine glass cradled loosely in his fingers like an accessory. His voice carried farther than he realized. "Once we get Farrell Tech CEO to sign off, we'll triple our portfolio returns." He laughed as if the future had already been wired into his account. "It's practically done." Celia sat next to him, her eyes bright with polite attentiveness, though I recognized the small tells of tension, shoulders too straight, smile too static. Ariel was already half drunk, swirling her wine like it held secrets she hadn't earned. Then the double doors to the back of the room opened behind me, and Xander Dupont entered. The moment his polished shoes crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. Conversation stuttered. Heads turned. There was something about Xander. Tall, elegant, the kind of presence that made people assume he owned the air they breathed. I watched Gregory notice him. His spine straightened. His lips curved into what he must have thought was an inviting smile. But Xander's eyes weren't on him. They were locked on me. His expression didn't shift with surprise. It shifted with reverence. He crossed the room with long strides, halting just a few feet in front of the Blaine table. Gregory rose halfway, already launching into some version of a greeting, but Xander ignored him entirely. Instead, he turned toward me and, with his voice carrying just the right amount of gravity, bowed. "Sir President," he said. The entire table stilled. "I didn't know this was your family." The last word was spoken like a confession, a soft warning wrapped in velvet. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I let the moment stretch out like glass before the crack. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. Gregory blinked first, standing slowly, mouth parting. "You're the president of AM Foundry?" His voice sounded like it was being filtered through sandpaper. Ariel blinked in confusion. Her glass paused halfway to her lips. "Wait, what?" Celia looked at me then. Really looked. Like someone waking up in a room they didn't recognize. She hadn't stood. She hadn't even moved. But her face began to change. Xander stepped aside and pulled out a chair, my chair. I sat, deliberately and calmly, at the head of the table as if I'd always belonged there. He took the seat next to me, retrieved a slim leather folder from his briefcase, and placed it between us. "The final contracts are here," he said. "The Farrell Tech acquisition is complete. Digital rights, branding, and patents now fall under the ownership of AM Foundry and its subsidiaries." He glanced at Gregory without a hint of apology. This meeting was a formality. The deal closed at noon. Gregory's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The two investors across the table looked at each other with thinly veiled discomfort. Ariel slumped further in her seat, either too tipsy or too stunned to respond. But it was Celia's expression that I watched, that I measured. Not anger, not relief, just dawning comprehension. A long overdue realization washing through every corner of her assumptions. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked quietly, barely audible over the jazz humming through the room speakers. I looked at her. "Would you have believed me?" She didn't answer. Her silence joined the others. I leaned forward, glancing at the wine bottle at the center of the table. Bordeaux. Probably $400 a bottle. Gregory's preferred label. I poured myself a glass, letting the scent settle into my senses. For years, I said, you've looked at me and seen what you wanted to see. A man who didn't go to Stanford, who didn't come from money, who didn't belong in your world. And I never corrected you. I looked up at Gregory, who had now sunk back into his chair like someone adjusting to a new reality. Because I didn't need to. I turned to Xander. Please inform the servers we'll cover tonight's tab, and that they're free to comp any guest the Blaine party invited. Discreetly, Xander nodded, slipping his phone from his pocket. Gregory spoke at last, his voice hoarse. This changes everything. I took a sip of wine. No, I said. It reveals everything. His knuckles whitened around his napkin. We thought. We just assumed. I raised an eyebrow. Exactly. Celia placed her hands in her lap. You've been building this the whole time. I nodded. Every late night. Every quiet moment. Every time I let someone else talk over me. Her voice trembled slightly. You let me believe I was the one with ambition. I didn't say anything. Because that's what silence does. It forces people to do the math they never thought they'd need. The weight of every moment they ignored you becomes exponential. Ariel let out a single drunken laugh, sharp and misplaced. This is insane, she said. You're the CEO of AM Foundry. You own this place. And nobody here had a clue. That, I said, glancing around the table, was the point. And then I sat back in my chair, surrounded by the sound of their silence. I didn't need applause. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted them to see. Finally, truly see. Not because I demanded their respect, but because I never needed it to begin with. Gregory stood up so fast the wine glass rattled, tipping over and spilling its contents in a dark red arc across the white tablecloth. He didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. His eyes were on me, wide, almost glassy. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor, one he built himself. You're the president of AM Foundry? He stammered, as though saying the words out loud might change the answer. I didn't flinch. I just stared back at him, letting him sit with it. I wanted him to feel the pressure of it, the weight of all the things he'd ignored, the arrogance that had kept him from seeing the truth that had always been in front of him. Celia looked from me to her father, then back to me. Wait, what? She whispered. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She was still in that free-fall moment when the floor vanishes beneath your feet and you haven't decided whether to scream or to fly. Ariel blinked slowly, wine glass in hand, clearly trying to piece it together through her buzz. I leaned back in my chair, nodded toward the empty seat next to Xander, and slowly filled it. Then I looked Gregory straight in the eye and said, You told me to wait in the car. That was your first mistake. The silence that followed felt like standing in the eye of a storm. The dining room noise, the laughter, the clinking cutlery, the music, all receded into a dull, distant hum. I could feel their confusion thickening, layering with years of assumptions and subtle slights. This wasn't just about AM Foundry or Maison Farrell or Feral Tech. This was about the man they'd misjudged in 1,000 small ways across 1,000 small dinners, brunches, weddings, and holidays. The son-in-law they spoke over. The man who was good enough to buy their daughter an expensive dress, but never good enough to speak when real conversation started. They had never connected the dots. Because they never tried. Gregory was still standing, frozen like a wax figure. All this time, he muttered. You were right there. And you never said anything. No one asked, I said simply. That line hung in the air like smoke. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? They never asked. They talked at me, around me, through me. I was always just there. Like furniture. Comfortable. Unthreatening. Forgettable. That was their second mistake. Ariel tilted her head, her voice slurring just enough to make her seem younger than she was. So wait, you were rich this whole time? I gave her a flat look. Success isn't about being rich. It's about control. Her laugh was nervous and cracked halfway through. Damn, she muttered. Celia, did you know any of this? Celia didn't speak. She just stared. Not with betrayal, there was no heat in her eyes. No accusation. It was something colder. A stunned stillness. A realization that maybe she hadn't known the man she'd married after all. Or maybe she had, and had simply never looked close enough to see him clearly. Xander cleared his throat, trying to add structure to the unraveling conversation. Sir President, he still used the title, loud and deliberate, has been a silent majority shareholder in Feral Tech for the past 14 months. His company's investment portfolio includes not only this restaurant chain, but several of your competitors in biotech, real estate, and finance. He gestured respectfully toward Gregory. Tonight's meeting was, in effect, a courtesy. The deal was never in question. Your firm's projection models. Stop, Gregory cut in, finally sinking into his chair. Just stop. I watched him fall into himself, the way pride folds when it has nowhere else to go. I knew that look. I'd worn it once, years ago, when I thought I wasn't enough. Before I learned that being underestimated was a kind of fuel. You thought I wasn't paying attention, I said, my voice low and even. You thought I didn't know what this dinner was really for. You wanted to impress the feral tech CEO and corner him into giving you equity access before the rebrand. He didn't deny it. I thought that I wasn't in the room. I finished for him. That's always been your mistake. Ariel, for once, had nothing to say. She looked between her father and me, then slumped further into her chair, setting her wine glass down carefully as if movement might shatter the fragile moment. Celia finally exhaled. Just once. Soft and sharp. You've been building something behind the scenes all this time. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was simply trying to hold on to something solid. Why not tell me? I looked at her, not harshly but without apology. Because you were never listening. That landed harder than I expected. Her mouth parted slightly, but nothing came out. They built their world on names, Blaine, Stanford, legacy firms, old connections. Their table was reserved only for the chosen. And I had spent years eating quietly at the edge, waiting for them to notice I wasn't eating scraps. I was preparing a feast of my own. And now, they were sitting at it, whether they liked it or not. Xander stood and excused himself to the private room where the legal documents were waiting, leaving the four of us at the table in the wreckage of their assumptions. I didn't move. I let it sit. Let them process it all in real time, without interruption. Because for once, I didn't have to prove anything. I didn't have to justify or explain. The facts had done that for me. I'd been the man behind the curtain. And now, they were seeing me fully lit for the first time. Not angry, not vindictive, just present, powerful in ways they hadn't even imagined. Gregory finally looked at me, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance. What happens now? I sipped my wine and set the glass down carefully. Now, I repeated, now, you learn how to live in a world you don't control anymore. I rose from the table without another word. And as I walked away, not a single one of them tried to stop me. Because for the first time in their lives, they realized they couldn't. 5 years ago, the air inside Gregory Blaine's office had smelled like old cigars and new money. Not a single thing was out of place. Everything from the mahogany desk to the silver picture frames was arranged with the sterile precision of a man who needed the illusion of control. I remember standing there in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit across the shoulders, my resume printed on ivory paper and gripped between my fingers like a lifeline. Celia stood beside me, smiling with the nervous energy of someone who'd rehearsed this in her head a dozen times. She kept adjusting the strap of her handbag, glancing between me and her father like she was trying to bridge a gap that had always been too wide. Gregory didn't stand when we entered. He just looked up from his tablet, glanced over my resume, then tossed it onto the desk with a flat expression. Assistant analyst, he said, as though the words tasted sour. It's the best I can offer for now. You'll shadow one of our junior partners. See how you perform. I nodded slowly, letting the silence grow a spine between us. That's generous, I said, but I'll have to decline. Celia turned sharply toward me. What? Her voice cracked with disbelief, as if I'd just thrown away a winning lottery ticket. Gregory's face twisted into something between amusement and irritation. Decline? You haven't even sat down. I don't need to, I replied. You've already decided what I am. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. You're a kid with no pedigree and a decent GPA. You think you're going to do better than this? I don't think, I said. I know. His laugh was soft, pitiful. Let me guess, you want to launch a startup from a garage. Write code on napkins. Change the world in your underwear like Zuckerberg. Not in my underwear, I said. But the rest? Maybe. Celia stepped forward, her voice low and urgent. Can we just talk about this? This is a real opportunity. A foot in the door. I looked at her. At the worry in her eyes, the pressure she felt being caught between love and legacy. But I also saw the unspoken message there. Don't embarrass me. Not here. Not in front of him. I appreciate the offer, I said, turning back to Gregory. But I'm not here to be someone else's shadow. I'd rather fail building something that's mine than succeed carrying someone else's briefcase. Then you're going to fail, he said flatly. This industry doesn't reward idealists. No, I replied. It rewards vision. You just don't see mine yet. I left the office without another word. Celia followed me into the elevator, furious. Why would you do that? Why would you throw that away? The doors closed between us and the 24th floor. I could feel the weight of her stare as I watched the numbers count down. Because I'm not going to beg for a seat at a table I can build myself, I said. You could have at least tried, she muttered. You could have just played along. Played along with a man who doesn't respect me? I shook my head. That's not a job. That's submission. For weeks after that, things were cold between us. She didn't understand at first, not really. But I didn't try to convince her. I let my silence speak. I got to work. I cashed out the last of my savings. I sold the vintage guitar I'd kept since college, pawned a watch my grandfather had given me, and moved into a tiny one-bedroom above a bakery in Mission Hill. Rent was cheap. The floor creaked. I had to share Wi-Fi with the shop downstairs, and the water heater was the definition of unreliable. But I was free. I called up my old professor, Alan Morrow, who had taught me advanced systems modeling at Stanford's extension program. He was semi-retired, brilliant, and bored. I pitched him an idea. A real-time data integration engine that could analyze acquisition targets and predict long-term viability better than the spreadsheets and bias-riddled models people like Gregory relied on. He didn't say yes right away. He made me prove it. So I did. With 5 used laptops, a scratched-up whiteboard, and a spreadsheet full of rejection emails, we began writing code until 2 in the morning, night after night. I ate ramen and skipped rinse sometimes. But I never wavered. We called it AM Foundry, Alan and Milo. He thought it sounded too dramatic. I said it sounded like a forge, and that was exactly what we were building. The first year, no one cared. We sent pitches into the void. We got laughed out of rooms. But then, we landed our first contract, modifying an analytics suite for a boutique firm in Palo Alto. They paid us $30,000. We split it straight down the middle. I bought a mattress that didn't fold when I sat on it. The second year, we doubled our contracts. By year 3, we had 10 employees in our own office space, a third-floor walk-up above a bookstore. And then feral tech happened. They'd hit a wall, bloated infrastructure, misaligned acquisitions, hemorrhaging money on underperforming assets. Gregory had been circling like a vulture. But I saw something different. I saw a phoenix. So I made my move. Quietly. I worked with Xander DuPont behind the scenes, offered him a buyout and full autonomy under AM Foundry. He didn't blink. He just asked when we could start. The funny thing is, no one from Celia's side ever noticed. Even as my suits got sharper and my nights got shorter, even as Celia began attending charity galas with new jewelry and more expensive shoes, they never asked where it came from. They assumed it was luck. They assumed it was her. Not once did Gregory look me in the eye and ask what I did with my time. Not once did he see the fire behind the polite smiles and quiet nods. And that's the truth most people never grasp. Real power doesn't need to prove itself. It just builds, brick by brick, code by code, choice by choice. So yes, 5 years ago, I walked out of that office with nothing but a spine and a stubborn heart. They thought I was wasting my time, but they were wrong. I wasn't wasting it. I was investing it, every second of it. And now, the returns are right on schedule. Ariel was on her 3rd glass of wine, maybe her 4th. It was hard to tell because she kept switching glasses with whoever was nearest, giggling like it was all a game. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyeliner slightly smudged from either sweat or carelessness. I watched her lean back in her chair, arms draped over the sides like she was lounging in her own living room. She tilted her head toward me and slurred, Is this some kind of prank? Her voice rang with disbelief, teetering on that line between mockery and panic. It was the tone of someone who realized the world had changed without her and was scrambling to make it all make sense. Xander didn't even blink. No prank, he said calmly, his voice measured and crisp. Sir President owns controlling shares of Feral Tech, Maison Feral, and AM Foundry, our parent firm. The meeting tonight was to sign over our digital assets to his new subsidiary. He said it like a closing argument, like a stone dropping into a pond. Gregory sat there motionless, eyes darting between us like he was trying to find an exit that didn't make him look small. The 2 investors who had joined them looked like they'd swallowed broken glass. Neither spoke. One began dabbing his lips with his napkin, slowly, as if it might buy him time to process this sudden power shift. Ariel laughed again, but it cracked this time. I mean, wow, she said, half to herself. You? You're the one they've been hyping up in the market news? Milo Rivers? She squinted at me like I was a hologram. But you're just Celia's husband. I smiled, not with warmth, but with something sharper. That's how you saw me. She blinked, stunned by the coldness in my voice. Then she leaned toward Celia, wobbling slightly in her seat. Wait, is that how you got your promotion at Silverbridge? Through him. Her tone was joking, but her eyes weren't. The whole table went stiff. Even the music seemed to soften as if the speakers themselves were listening. Celia's head whipped toward Ariel. What did you just say? Ariel shrugged. I mean, come on. Everyone was wondering. You barely got moved off project coordination, and then boom. Junior VP? Her lips curled. Now it makes sense. You had the ultimate backdoor. The comment hung there like rod in the air. Celia's face drained of color. She turned to me, eyes wide, voice trembling. Did you help me? I didn't answer. I just picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. Let them stew in it. Let them feel the weight of every assumption, every private eye roll, every time they thought I was invisible. Because none of them knew what it cost me to keep my name out of her story. None of them knew I'd called in a favor, just one, anonymously recommending her for a program she deserved on merit alone. I never asked for anything in return. I never wanted credit. I just wanted her to thrive. I wanted her to feel like the world saw her the way I did. But now I sat across from her while her own sister ripped that thread apart. Gregory cleared his throat, trying to change the subject, but it was already too late. The damage had been done. I could see the sting in Celia's eyes, not at me, but at the realization that the promotion she fought for, cried over, bled through late nights for, now felt like it had a shadow. She looked back at Ariel, jaw clenched. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. Ariel threw her hands up. Relax. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. I mean, we all thought he was just the guy who fixed doorknobs and paid the dinner bill. Turns out he's sitting on an empire. She hiccuped a laugh. Guess I should have flirted more. The table went silent again. Her words were sloppy, but they landed in all the wrong places, like sparks in a dry field. I could feel Celia's tension coil beside me, and for a second, I wondered if she'd finally say something. Something real. But she didn't. She just looked away. That was the part that cut deeper than I expected. Not the assumptions. Not Ariel's drunken jabs. But Celia's silence. Not a denial. Not a defense. Just absence. I set my glass down. I didn't pull strings for you. I said to her. Not the way they think. I vouched for you. Once. Quietly. You earned everything else. She looked at me, finally, her eyes soft but unreadable. Then why didn't you tell me? Because you were supposed to believe you did it alone, I replied. You're brilliant, Celia. I never wanted you to think you were standing in my shadow. She blinked, and I could see the conflict behind her eyes, the years of trying to keep everyone happy, of playing the middle between me and them. But now there was no middle. There was just the truth, laid bare and irreversible. Gregory finally stood, pushing his chair back with a hard scrape against the floor. I think this dinner's over, he muttered, voice clipped and brittle. Yes, I said, meeting his eyes. It is. I looked down the table at the spilled wine, the empty plates, the cracked illusions. And so is pretending. Ariel slumped back in her chair, muttering something about ordering another bottle. Celia didn't move. She sat frozen, shoulders tight, fingers curled into her napkin. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and glanced at Xander, who gave a short nod, understanding everything without needing to say it out loud. As I turned away from the table, I felt Celia's gaze on my back. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't offer a hand or an explanation. I'd done enough of that in the shadows. Tonight wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about teaching them a lesson. It was about letting them see the truth, raw and unavoidable. I wasn't the man outside their world anymore. I was the world they didn't know they were living in. And nothing would ever be the same again. The valet lobby smelled like lemon polish and wealth. Outside, the city was quiet for a Friday night, fog curling low along the pavement, headlights sliding past like ghosts. I stood near the double glass doors, watching the blur of traffic and taillights. My reflection in the glass didn't look any different, and that was the strange part. I didn't feel bigger. I didn't feel like the man who'd just upended a legacy family's illusion of control. I just felt steady, present. Behind me, the soft tap of heels approached, slow and hesitant. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. You embarrassed my family, Celia's voice snapped, tight and sharp as broken glass. I turned slightly, enough to meet her eyes. They weren't angry, not in the way she probably wanted them to be. They were wounded, betrayed, not because of what I'd done, but because I'd done it without her. No, I said. Your family embarrassed me. Every day. Until you all forgot I was watching. She folded her arms. So this was payback? A performance? Her tone was clipped, but it wavered near the end. It wasn't revenge, I replied. It was clarity. She scoffed. Don't do that. Don't turn this into some noble crusade. You sat at that table knowing everything. You let us all sit there like fools. I gave you the chance to see me, I said, stepping closer. Not the version you all dressed up in silence and assumption. Me. The man you never asked about after dinner. The man who disappeared into his laptop while you went to sleep thinking I was just browsing job boards. Her mouth opened, but she had nothing ready. Just breath and the bitter taste of realization. Is this why you never fought back? She asked, softer now. When my dad dismissed you. When Ariel mocked you. When she cut herself off. I didn't blink. No. I didn't fight back because I knew who I was becoming. And I didn't need any of you to validate that. I was building something that didn't require applause. I stepped past her then, toward the valet stand. The attendant recognized me and nodded, already jogging toward the car. Celia didn't follow. But she didn't walk away either. You could have told me, she said, her voice now barely above a whisper. We're married, Milo. You should have told me. I turned and looked at her. And for the first time in years, I didn't see my wife. I saw someone standing at the edge of a version of herself, when she wasn't sure she could return to. I tried, I said, 100 times, in small ways. But you were always in a room I wasn't invited into. Even in our own house. She flinched like the truth had struck her physically. And maybe it had. You think I chose them over you? No, I said. I think you chose to blend in. To keep peace. To avoid waves. And in doing that, you stopped noticing I was drifting farther away. The valet pulled the car around, the engine humming gently. He opened the door, but I didn't get in right away. Celia stepped forward, her eyes glistening with something she wasn't ready to name. So what now? She asked. You go off and become this titan and I just vanish? No, I said. You get to decide who you are without them. Just like I did. But you don't get to decide who I am anymore. She looked down at the ground, then back at me. Her lip trembled, just once. Did you ever love me? Or was I part of the plan? That one hurt. Deeper than I wanted it to. You were never part of the plan, I said. You were the reason I didn't give up on it. She didn't know what to say to that. Neither did I. The pause between us wasn't silence. It was a funeral. The burial of all the moments we never really spoke honestly. The early days when we dreamed together but didn't ask what the other wanted. The nights I came to bed late and she never asked why. The mornings she left early and I stopped trying to catch her. I didn't mean for this, she whispered. I didn't know I was making you invisible. I nodded. That's the problem. None of you did. I got in the car, the door closing with a soft thud between us. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to see her standing there, arms folded, lost between pride and regret. I knew that looked too well. I'd worn it myself once. Before I let go of the need to be seen. Before I understood that real power, real peace, comes when you no longer beg for acknowledgement. You just live. Fully. Unapologetically. As I pulled away from the restaurant, the lights of Maison Feral faded behind me, swallowed by fog and memory. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to Gregory. Not to Ariel. Not even to Celia. The man who sat silently at family dinners, who held doors and paid for dresses and smiled through dismissals, he wasn't gone. He was still part of me, but he'd stepped aside, so I could step forward. And as I drove through the city, my phone buzzed again. A message from Jenna Ruiz, my COO. Boards aligned. Morning call with Singapore moved to 6:30. Confirm? I typed back, confirmed. Thanks. Then I placed the phone face down beside me. I didn't need to watch it light up with the world's expectations. I had everything I needed already. The quiet. The clarity. The choice. The next morning, the skyline looked different from the 47th floor of the Duxton building. Sunlight spilled in through the glass panels, reflecting off the marble floors like a slow wave of gold. The city below buzzed as usual. Cars in motion, lives unfolding, but up here, It was quiet, controlled, my kind of atmosphere. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling window, sipping black coffee from a matte ceramic mug, watching the world I used to chase now exist beneath my feet. There was something satisfying in the stillness before a storm, especially when you were the one deciding if thunder would roll. Lauren buzzed through the intercom. Gregory Blaine just arrived. Shall I send him in? I didn't answer immediately. I took one last sip, set the mug down, then turned to face my desk. Give him 60 seconds. Then send him. Yes, sir. I heard the faint click as the line cut. When Gregory stepped into my office, it was like watching someone carry the ghost of their former self. He wasn't wearing his usual power suit. Today, it was charcoal gray, uncharacteristically wrinkled at the cuffs, and his tie knot sagged slightly, like it had been yanked loose in frustration. The man who once refused to take meetings outside of his own firm was now standing here, in my space, surrounded by everything he pretended didn't exist. His eyes darted around, taking in the leather-bound annuals, the clean surfaces, the quiet hum of purpose behind the frosted glass walls. It wasn't intimidation that flickered across his face. It was unfamiliarity. And unfamiliarity to a man like Gregory felt like weakness. We're hemorrhaging clients, he said before even sitting. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual smugness. 2 of our major accounts pulled out this morning. One of them mentioned AM Foundry by name. I gestured to the seat across from me. Sit. He obeyed without pushback. That was new. Celia said you might help, he added reluctantly. He couldn't quite bring himself to say the next part, so I let him stew in it. Finally, after a long pause, he muttered, Please. I sat down slowly, steepling my fingers in front of me. Funny how quickly the mountain man learns to knock when the avalanche starts. He didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. Let's get one thing straight, I said. I'm not doing this for Celia. I'm not doing this because I owe you anything. I'm doing it because I believe in systems that work. And right now, Blaine Capital is a blueprint for dysfunction. He shifted in his seat, unprepared for how clinical this conversation would be. What would you propose? I reached for the folder Lauren had placed on the desk earlier that morning. I opened it, flipped the page, then slid it across to him. Blaine Capital becomes an AM Foundry subsidiary, I said, effective immediately. He stiffened. You want to absorb us? No, I corrected. I want to rewire you. The Blaine name can stay on the door if it helps your pride, but make no mistake, the ownership structure changes. Control changes. He skimmed the pages, frowning harder with each paragraph. And the executive team? He asked. They'll have to reapply, I said. No grandfathered roles. No inherited positions. Every title must be earned. He looked up sharply. You're dismantling my firm. No, I said again. I'm preserving what's left of it. If I wanted to dismantle it, I'd let it bleed out. You've lost credibility, trust, and momentum. I'm offering a chance to rebuild. And Celia? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. She starts at junior partner. Like everyone else. No favoritism. She'll earn her trajectory one metric at a time. But she's my wife. I interrupted. That's irrelevant in this office. She knows that. Or she will. He sat back, mouth drawn into a tight line, his pride visibly cracking under the pressure of inevitability. This is humiliating, he whispered. That's not my concern, I replied. I don't do rescue missions. I do restructures. If your ego can't survive that, then neither can your business. I watched him struggle to swallow it, like every line on the page was a bitter pill dipped in truth. Then I leaned forward and added the final term, the one I had saved for last. Your new COO will be Jenna Ruiz, I said. She'll lead operations until quarterly performance stabilizes. Who? He blinked. My operations lead. She's 29. MBA from Cal State Northridge. Started with me when AM Foundry had 1 floor and a dozen folding chairs. Now she oversees a portfolio worth $2.3 billion. His face twisted. She went to a public school. Yes, I said, holding his gaze. And she built systems that outperform yours by a factor of 10. She doesn't have your connections. But she has something better proof. The word landed hard. I didn't soften it. You'll report to her, I continued. Not to me. She'll audit your processes, interview your senior team, and make final recommendations on your retention structure. If that's unacceptable, walk out now. Gregory stared at me. This was a man who once told me, over Thanksgiving dinner, that merit only mattered after introductions. A man who believed names opened more doors than numbers. Now, his door had been shut, and I held the master key. This isn't what I imagined, he muttered. Neither was being told to wait in the car, I said. The room went quiet. Not tense, just still. The kind of quiet that wraps around realization and leaves no room for ego to breathe. Sign the deal, Gregory, I said. Let your legacy become something useful. Or walk away and watch the industry forget you. He looked at the contract, and for a moment, I thought he might throw it back. But he didn't. He picked up the pen, and his hand only trembled a little when he signed. When he finally stood, the weight on his shoulders seemed to double. Will Celia hate me for this? He asked, not looking me in the eye. I think, I said, standing as well. She's still trying to decide whether to hate you for everything before this. He nodded once, like a man who'd finally heard something true. Then he walked out without another word. And as the door shut behind him, I exhaled. Not in relief. In control. Because the empire they once refused to see was now the structure holding theirs up. And I didn't need revenge. I had policy. I had systems. And most of all, I had the last word. 3 weeks later, I walked into Blaine Capital for the first time since the day Gregory offered me that assistant analyst role. It looked different now, not just the cosmetic renovations, but the energy. The walls were no longer heavy with pretense. The glass doors that once served as barriers now stood open, welcoming transparency instead of concealing secrets. New signage gleamed in the lobby, smaller font beneath the Blaine name, reading an AM Foundry Company. A phrase that said everything without shouting. I didn't need my name in gold. I just needed the room to function better than it ever had. The receptionists were new, young, sharp, and alert. One of them, a woman named Nia, greeted me with a confident smile and a clipped, "Good morning, Mr. Rivers." It felt strange hearing that title in this building. For so long, I had been Celia's husband, or the guy Celia's dating, or just another body at a company dinner. But now, I was no longer background noise. I wasn't here to be noticed. I was the reason people were speaking in lower tones and walking faster with purpose. I nodded to Nia. Is Jenna in the boardroom? Yes, sir, she replied. They've already started the operations recap. Would you like to be announced? No, I said. Let them work. I'm just here to observe. I made my way down the corridor, noting the subtle changes. No more oil paintings of former Blaine partners on the walls. Instead, framed data visualizations and performance metrics from AM Foundry subsidiaries hung in their place. Each one told a story of success, growth, and resilience. Stories that were earned, not inherited. I passed Gregory in the hallway. He was speaking with one of the analysts, his voice low, deferential. When he saw me, he stiffened, offered a nod that barely brushed civility. I returned it with silence. He looked thinner somehow. Smaller. Not just in stature, but in relevance. He knew it too. That was the difference. He'd spent decades walking into rooms assuming he was the center of gravity. Now he walked in hoping no one would measure his distance from it. Celia sat at her desk just outside the strategy wing. She didn't see me at first. Her eyes were glued to her screen, fingers flying over the keyboard, headset tilted at an angle. She looked different, sharper in posture, more precise in the way she carried herself. For the first time, I saw her working for something real, not just showing up to perform loyalty for a family name. She looked up briefly and met my eyes. No smile, no frown, just a long, knowing look. She didn't mouth a hello. She didn't need to. That look said, I'm still here. And mine replied, so am I. That was enough. The boardroom had been stripped of its ego. No massive chandelier. No mahogany conference table that was more about intimidation than utility. Instead, sleek design, clean lines, and glass panels that framed the city behind us. Jenna stood at the head of the table, a touchscreen behind her displaying the updated metrics. She was in full control, confident, unshaken, clear. Her voice carried not with arrogance, but with certainty. In the last 21 days, she said, clicking through her slides, we've restructured 3 departments, trimmed overhead by 14%, and doubled lead generation through the implementation of AM Foundry's analytics engine. We've recovered 2 accounts and are in final negotiations to onboard 3 more. All without slashing payroll. The room was full, executives, team leads, new hires, and a few reluctant holdovers from Gregory's old guard. No one interrupted her. No one dared. She commanded the space with facts and precision. Not titles. Not legacy. Just results. I stood in the back, leaning against the wall, arms crossed as I watched her do what she did best. Not a single person acknowledged me out loud. But a few eyes darted my way, quick, curious glances. They knew who I was now. But they also knew the rules had changed. Jenna wrapped up the report and opened the floor. Any questions before we move on to quarter two projections? One of the new department heads, a quiet man named Marcus with a background in risk assessment, raised a hand. Are we shifting hiring priorities? Jenna nodded. We're looking for competency and collaboration. Background matters, but not the kind that fits on a bumper sticker. If you've got a friend from Harvard, cool. But if your intern knows more than your friend, we're hiring the intern. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the room. I smiled. That was the culture I built. No pedigrees, just performance. Someone turned toward me. Mr. Rivers, anything you'd like to add? Jenna looked over too, one eyebrow raised. She wasn't nervous, just curious. I shook my head. No, let your work speak. That's the new rule. Jenna smiled faintly and turned back to her agenda. She didn't need my approval. She already had it. And that, more than anything, was the shift I'd waited for. This company didn't belong to one man anymore. It belonged to the system we built together, honest, transparent, unsentimental. I didn't need to sit at the head of the table. I just needed to know the people who did deserve to be there. After the meeting, I lingered for a moment while the others cleared out. Jenna approached, tablet tucked under one arm. You good? She asked. Better than good, I replied. This place, it's finally breathing. She nodded. Gregory hasn't said a word in any of the last 3 meetings. Just listens and takes notes. That's fine, I said. Let the silence do its work. She tilted her head. And Celia? I glanced back through the glass wall. Celia was still at her desk, eyes focused, hands steady. We're finding out who we are when no one's pretending anymore. Jenna didn't press. She never did. If you need me, I'm reviewing compensation packages this afternoon. Some of the new hires are outperforming their managers. I smirked. Good. Promote the right ones, no matter how new they are. Always, she said. And just like that, she walked out. I stood alone in the boardroom, sunlight warming the sleek table, the city murmuring beyond the glass. This was no longer the Blaine Empire. This was something new, something better, not built on bloodlines, but on earned ground. And as I looked out over the skyline, I realized something simple, something powerful. I didn't need to prove I belonged here anymore. I had built the kind of place where no one had to. 2 months later, I found myself standing outside a quiet little bistro in Pacific Heights, holding a reservation card Celia had slipped into a cream-colored envelope and left on my desk. No message, just a time and a place. Her handwriting hadn't changed, slanted, precise, a little dramatic in the loops like she always was when she wanted something to matter. I showed up 10 minutes early. Not because I was eager, but because I wanted a moment to feel the shift. To sit in the calm before whatever this conversation was going to be. The maitre d' recognized my name, and within seconds, I was led to a private booth in the back, already set for 2. Candlelight flickered against glassware, casting delicate shadows across the white linen. Celia arrived right on time, not a second early or late. That used to annoy me, how measured she was, how perfectly composed. Now, I just saw it for what it was, discipline in heels. She wore a simple black dress. Nothing flashy. No power jewelry or designer labels shouting for attention. Just Celia, eyes clear, expression unreadable. Thanks for coming, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. You asked, I said. I didn't know if you would. Neither did I. We ordered. Lightly. She picked at a salad she wouldn't finish. I sipped at a glass of Merlot I didn't really want. It was clear she hadn't called this dinner for food. Or nostalgia. The silence between us was the most honest we'd ever shared. No filler, no pleasantries. Just tension and truth, pacing around each other like old enemies who once tried to be friends. Finally, she broke the silence. You could have crushed us. Her voice was soft, deliberate. You had the upper hand. You could have buried the firm, humiliated my father permanently, made me walk out of that boardroom with my dignity in a shoebox. I looked at her, not with anger, not even with coldness. Just stillness. I didn't want to crush anyone, I said. That's never been the point. Then what was, she asked, showing them what they missed? Watching us eat our own assumptions. I leaned forward slightly, fingers laced together. No. The point was that I don't have to prove myself to people who were never listening. I don't need Gregory's respect. I don't need Ariel's understanding. And I don't need your permission to be who I've always been. She stared at me for a long time. Then she lowered her gaze and whispered, You didn't even look surprised that night. Like you knew it would all fall into place. Because it already had, I said. I didn't build AM Foundry to impress anyone. I built it because I had to know what I was capable of when no one believed I could do it. The power didn't come from them knowing, it came from me no longer needing them to. Her breath caught slightly. You never even fought with us. You just endured. You don't fight to sit at a table you're going to own, I replied. You let them talk. You let them underestimate you. And then you build. Quietly. Relentlessly. She nodded slowly, like she finally understood the rhythm I'd been living to all along. I think. I'm just realizing what I lost, she said. Not what we had, but what I never saw in you. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't soften it. That's not on you alone, I said. I didn't show you, not really. I was afraid that if I stepped into my full self, I'd leave you behind. Or worse, you'd resent it. She looked up, eyes raw now. And now I know that if I have to dim to keep someone close, they were never really with me in the first place. She reached for her water, hands trembling just slightly. So what does this mean for us? I paused. That question didn't come with a yes or no. It came with memories and fractures, choices made in quiet, and the space that had grown between us like a bridge no one maintained. Let me ask you something first, I said. If you met me for the first time tonight, me as I really am, not the man you thought I was, would you have married me? She didn't blink. She didn't even hesitate. Yes, she whispered, without question. And that almost undid me. Because it wasn't a line. It wasn't desperation. It was a truth she hadn't even known until recently. Then maybe, I said, voice low, we get to start again. Not from scratch, but from honesty. She exhaled slowly, like something in her chest had finally unclinched. I don't want to be the woman who only loves you once you're successful, she said. I want to be the woman who sees it as it's happening, who grows beside it. I nodded. Then stop standing in rooms that shrink you to fit them. Stop explaining your worth to people who don't ask about your process. Build your own space, Celia. And if we still end up side by side after that, then we know it's real. The check came. She didn't reach for it. And neither did I. I just nodded at the server. It's taken care of. We stepped outside together, the air cool and forgiving. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything shifting beneath her. You're not the same man I married, she said. No, I agreed. And you're not the same woman who watched me walk into your father's office 5 years ago. She looked at me with something new, something softer. Maybe that's a good thing. I didn't answer. Because maybe it was. Or maybe it was the beginning of a truth we had to earn now, one choice at a time. But what I did know, as I opened her car door and watched her slide in with grace she didn't have to borrow anymore, was this. I'd never sit in the car again. Not figuratively. Not literally. Not for anyone. Because once you've built your own table, you don't beg for a seat at anyone else's. You sit where you choose. You invite who deserves it. And you leave the door open, only if they're willing to see you for who you are. 6 months later, Maison Farrell was no longer Maison Farrell. The rebranding had been subtle but absolute. The Foundry House. New name, new energy, same location. But the glow that now radiated from its windows felt warmer, more intentional. I stood at the balcony above the main hall, watching as guests filtered into the investor gala. Men and women in suits that fit better than their old egos, laughter carried by conviction rather than calculation. Every table was filled with people who had earned their place, people who had built things, survived storms, shaped ideas into structure. No empty titles. No legacy placeholders. Just people who worked. My kind of room. Gregory was standing near the back wall. No entourage, no whispered dominance. Just a name tag clipped to his lapel like everyone else. There was no longer a special place carved out for him, not because he didn't matter, but because he had finally learned how to listen without expecting applause. He caught my eye once, nodded respectfully, and then turned back toward the tray of hors d'oeuvres without needing to be more than that, another guest, another attendee, not the center of gravity. That was progress. Celia stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder. Not clinging, not hiding. Her name was on the board now, earned. Her promotion hadn't come from my hand, but from her output, her record, her willingness to finally stand without waiting for her father's approval. She looked out at the room, eyes scanning the crowd with a quiet awareness I'd come to admire. She belonged here, not as my wife, as herself. And me? I took my seat at the head of the table, one that didn't tower but anchored. No fanfare, no speech, just presence. because I didn't need to remind them who I was. They knew. They remembered the night I was asked to wait in the car. And now, they understood that the man they once tried to exclude had built the table they now depended on to stay fed, to stay relevant, to stay in motion. But this wasn't about revenge. I'd moved beyond that. This was satisfaction, not the petty kind, but the full-bodied kind that comes when you know you became what you said you would, even when no one was watching. And as the music swelled, as the lights dimmed slightly, as conversations bloomed like quiet revolutions around me, I smiled. Because this time, no one got left in the car. Everyone who was supposed to be in the room was in the room. And this room? It was mine.